The void between stars is said to be infinite, but in the shadows of the Imperium there exists a darkness far deeper, a silence far heavier. It is the silence of a blade drawn without sound, the darkness of eyes that never blink, the weight of a life sworn not to service but to erasure. Among the countless billions who serve the Emperor, few are chosen for the path that is not life but slow annihilation of the self. They are the knives in the dark, the faceless phantoms, the imperial assassins of the Officio Assassinorum. Their existence is not celebrated in victory parades or hymned by ecclesiarchal choirs. Their victories are measured in names struck from records, in tyrants who never awoke to breathe their last dawn, in wars that ended before they began. And their fate, though glorious in doctrine, is in truth more horrifying than any battlefield death. For when one is forged into a weapon, one ceases to be human at all. This is not a tale of glory, it is a descent into the fate that awaits those who surrender their bodies, their souls, their very identities to the most secretive order of the Imperium. To speak of them is to invite fear, and to imagine their end is to stare into a pit where light cannot reach. Yet it is here we must linger, in the silence of their sacrifice, in the terror of their destiny. Before we begin, remember that the hidden stories of the Imperium live because you breathe life into them. So if you find yourself drawn deeper into this shadowed narrative, lend your strength by leaving your mark, subscribing to join the ranks of those who walk with us through the grim dark, and sharing these whispers so that others may hear what was never meant to be spoken aloud. Now, let us walk into the labyrinth of shadows and glimpse the fate of the Emperor's most silent killers. There is no dawn in the place where they are taken, for the children selected by the hidden hands of the Officio Assassinorum. There is no sunrise, no moment of warmth, no memory of parents calling their names. There is only the silence of a sealed shuttle, the taste of recycled air, and the echo of chains that rattle, though none can see them. They are not prisoners, at least not in the eyes of the Imperium, for prisoners still have names, still exist within the registry of mankind. These are unchildren, taken from orphanages, from battlefields, from the endless overflow of the Schola Progenium, where the Imperium deposits its unwanted, its traumatized, its broken fragments. To be chosen for the path of the assassin is not honor, it is erasure. The journey ends always in darkness. For some it is a descent into a vault buried beneath Terra itself, for others a transport to forgotten moons where the sun never pierces the storm. The assassin's clad temples are not places of beauty, but of suffocation. The very air tastes of iron. The walls sweat condensation. The ceilings are so high that light fails to reveal them, as though the sky itself has been swallowed. Here the children are greeted not by teachers but by masks. Instructors do not speak names. They speak commands through vox grills, their faces always hidden, their humanity denied so that no child may ever imagine they are being guided by something as frail as flesh. The first lessons are pain, not lessons that teach, but pain that punishes, pain that erodes the notion that the body belongs to oneself. The lashes fall not for disobedience, but for hesitation. A child who flinches at a blow is struck again. A child who does not breathe silently is deprived of air until unconsciousness takes them. The weak vanish quickly, bodies dragged into the shadows and never spoken of again. To the survivors, their absence is a greater wound than the beatings, for silence is heavier than suffering. They learn swiftly that survival is not measured in strength, but in the ability to erase themselves, to become unnoticed even among their peers, to vanish while standing still. The walls of the training chambers are hung with Imperial Aquilus, their two-headed gaze ever watching. But the children do not pray to them, for prayer is forbidden. The officio does not allow faith, only obedience. A whispered invocation earns the sting of electrified rods across the tongue. A child caught clutching a scrap of parchment bearing the emperor's image is forced to swallow it until their breath fails. The paradox is clear even to the smallest. They are taught to kill for the emperor, but forbidden to worship him. In the darkness of their bunks, they learn instead to worship silence, for silence never betrays them. Months bleed into years without markers. No birthdays are acknowledged. No seasons are felt. The only measure of time is the body's decay. Scars multiply across arms and legs. Teeth rot from chemical diets designed to starve weakness but never grant comfort. Sleep becomes a battlefield where nightmares claw at the mind, and yet even in sleep the body must remain motionless, for any sign of distress is met with the cold hand of punishment. They dream of faces they can no longer name, mothers and fathers whose voices are muffled, and each time they wake the memory fades a little more, until the only face left in their minds is the mask of the instructor. It is here, in this crucible of absence, that the first unmaking takes hold. The child ceases to believe they exist. They become aware of their hands not as their own, but as tools. They look at their reflection in a black pool of stagnant water and no longer recognize the eyes staring back. Some resist. Some cling to names whispered in the dark, to scraps of memory carved into their skin with stolen fragments of metal. But resistance is its own death sentence, for the officio does not shape rebels, it shapes weapons. In the rare moments of quiet, the children hear sounds from beyond their cell blocks, the distant screams of others in different training halls, the clatter of chains dragging across steel walkways, the whir of servo skulls carrying unknown instruments. And sometimes when the silence is deepest, they hear chanting far above, voices speaking litanies in languages they do not understand. Whether it is prayer, ritual, or simply another form of discipline, they never discover. But the sound seeps into their bones, an echo of something vast and terrible, a reminder that the shadows in which they live are not empty but filled with watchers whose eyes they will never meet. The first culling arrives without warning. Children are woken by klaxons, driven into vast arenas where the floor is slick with old blood. Weapons are thrown at their feet, blades dulled by age, clubs splintered with cracks, jagged shards of metal stripped from wreckage. No rules are spoken, no guidance given. The masks stand in silence as the children are left to understand. Survival demands violence, and so the arena becomes a storm of screams and breaking bones. Those who hesitate die first, torn apart by those who no longer remember hesitation. By dawn, or what would be dawn if the sun existed here, half the children are gone. Their bodies are taken away, and no graves are given. The survivors are not praised. They are told only you were sufficient. In this place, sufficiency is the highest honor. Excellence is irrelevant. To be sufficient is to exist another day. To fail is to vanish, as though one never was. And with each vanishing, the survivors feel themselves slipping further into the void. The officio assassinorum is not shaping soldiers, it is hollowing vessels. The arena was not the end of their trial, but its beginning. Those who survived its first massacre found themselves bound in new chains, not of iron but of secrecy. From that day forward, they were reminded again and again that their lives were no longer their own, and that every heartbeat they drew was borrowed from the emperor's hidden ledger. The children were marched through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past chambers filled with whispers and the reek of promethium, past sealed doors where muffled sounds of torment hinted at fates even crueler than their own. The halls themselves became a second instructor. Every wall bore etched script in high Gothic, fragments of commandments, oaths of silence, and promises of annihilation for betrayal. They read these words until they memorized them, until their eyes bled from repetition, until they ceased to be words at all and became chains around their souls. Soon came the trials of deprivation. Food was reduced until hunger no longer felt like emptiness, but like fire crawling through the veins. Water was rationed until lips split and bled. Those who begged for more were dragged away by servitors and never seen again. Sleep was stolen, interrupted by klaxons that forced them to rise and run for hours until legs broke beneath them. And always the instructors watched, their masked faces expressionless, their voices cold as machinery. The purpose was never explained. Explanations were weakness, and weakness was not tolerated. The children were to learn to exist without sustenance, to survive in voids of resource, to function when the body screamed for relief. In their torment they became creatures of endurance, shells animated by willpower alone. But endurance was not enough. They were made to fight again and again, not against enemies but against each other. The instructors paired them off at random, handed them crude knives and commanded them to spill blood. Sometimes the command was to maim, sometimes to cripple, sometimes to kill outright. Obedience meant survival, hesitation meant death. Friendships could not last in such a place. Bonds formed in the dark were broken the next day when one child was ordered to cut the throat of the other. By design, no attachment was allowed to take root. If any dared to grieve, their grief was punished until even sorrow was crushed from their souls. In this way, the officio began its greatest work, the removal of identity, for names are bonds, and bonds are chains, and the assassin must have no chains, but the emperor's will. Children were stripped of their names entirely. They were given numbers, short strings of digits burned into their forearms with hot brands. To be called by number was not humiliation, it was annihilation of self. After months, no child dared whisper their old name, for the memory itself became poison. They forgot who they had been, where they had come from, what laughter had once felt like. The numbers became the only truth they possessed, until even numbers were spoken less and less, replaced by silence. The instructors introduced fear as another tool. Fear was no longer punishment. It was the medium in which they breathed. The children were placed in pitch-black vaults for days at a time, chained alone, with only the sound of dripping water and their own heartbeats echoing in their skulls. Insects were loosed in the dark to crawl across their skin, biting and stinging, until the body convulsed. Gas filled the chambers, sweet-smelling at first, but soon choking, forcing the lungs to fight for every gasp. Some went mad in those vaults, tearing at their own flesh. Those who emerged alive had eyes like burnt coals, hollow, stripped of light, their terror sealed beneath new layers of obedience. There were whispers among the children, rumors born in stolen breaths between punishments. Some claimed they were still on Terra, beneath the mountains that cradle the golden throne. Others believed they were cast far into void stations orbiting dead suns. A few swore they had seen robed priests moving among the instructors, blessing them not with words, but with knives dipped in sacred oils. The truth was never revealed. The officio never allows truth to be known, only obedience. To seek knowledge was heresy, to wonder was weakness, and yet, in their shattered dreams, the children imagined the walls themselves whispering, as though the stone remembered all who had perished within it. Every failure ended the same way, with disappearance. A stumble on an obstacle course meant vanishing into the void. A cry of pain during blade drills meant the same. Children did not die where their fellows could see. They were taken instead by silent servitors whose augmetic eyes never blinked, carried into sealed doors beyond which no sound escaped. The message was cruelly clear. No one is allowed the dignity of a visible end. Death, like life, was to be erased, silent, forgotten. As years passed, the survivors no longer thought of themselves as children. They were fragments, shadows wearing skin, shaped by absence and silence. Their humanity was no longer stolen. It was willingly surrendered, piece by piece, because holding on to it meant agony. To be human in the halls of the Officio Assassinorum was to invite despair. To be nothing was to survive, and so they chose nothingness. When the instructors judged them ready, the true testing began. The numbers branded into their arms were seared away, burned until the flesh bubbled and scarred. In their place, each was given a mark of initiation, a sigil not of identity, but of purpose. To bear it was to belong no longer to themselves, but to the clade that would claim them. Vindicare, Coletus, Eversor, Calexis, each temple awaiting its chosen vessel, each path more horrifying than the last. And so the shaping of shadows was nearly complete. They had been stripped of family, of memory, of faith, of humanity itself. What remained was emptiness, and into that emptiness, the officio would pour its chosen form. The ceremony of selection was not spoken of, only endured. One by one, the survivors were led into chambers lit by a single swaying lumen, the air heavy with incense, so thick it clung to the throat. The instructors stood in a circle, masks glimmering faintly in the half-light, and at the center lay a slab of stone scarred by centuries of ritual. The child was stripped bare, every scar exposed, every weakness revealed, and forced upon the slab as though they were an offering. No words of comfort were given, no explanation. A knife was pressed to the chest, cold as the void, and the mark of the temple was carved directly into the flesh. The Vindicare received the mark upon the eye, a thin line etched outward like the sight of a scope. The Coletus bore it on the cheek, a serpent curling toward the lips. The Eversor endured it carved into the sternum, jagged and raw, while the Calexis were branded on the skull itself, their hair burned away by the heat of the iron. The pain was not meant to wound, but to baptize. Their blood was the ink of the Emperor's hidden covenant, their screams the hymn of initiation. When it was finished, silence was demanded. The child was raised from the slab and given nothing but a single sentence, whispered through the vox grill: "You are no longer you." From that moment forward, they were property of their temple. The halls divided, each clade leading its initiates down separate labyrinths of stone and iron. The partings were absolute. Those who had endured side by side for years would never see each other again. No farewells were allowed, no last glances. The officio understood too well the power of memory, and so it severed every possible tie. The child walked into the shadows of their temple, and all that remained of their past was ash upon the stone. The training within each temple was more than cruelty. It was transformation, for the Vindicare days became endless vigils upon cold towers, rifles pressed into shoulders until bone bruised and skin bled, the body starved of motion until stillness became as natural as breath. They learned to slow their own heartbeats, to count each pulse until time itself stretched into silence. Their minds were stripped of doubt, their eyes taught to see not a person but a target, not a face but a line of trajectory. The Coletus knew no rest. Their bodies were injected with alchemies that burned like molten fire, reshaping muscle and bone, twisting flesh into pliable clay. They were forced to wear masks of shifting toxins, to breathe fumes that would have killed others, to watch their skin blister and reform until they no longer knew the feel of their own face. Instructors whispered into their ears, not with voices but with lies, teaching them to wear deception as easily as clothing. They became creatures of adaptation, their very cells enslaved to the art of transformation. The Eversors suffered most of all. Their veins were filled with chemical madness, stimulants so potent that their hearts should have burst within hours. But the officio does not allow death when suffering is more useful. They were held in suspension, awakened only to be unleashed in frenzies of slaughter, taught to channel agony into violence, until their entire existence became a scream of fury bound in fragile flesh. For them, there was no subtlety, no stillness, only the ecstasy of destruction waiting behind every locked nerve. And then there were the Culexus, the unspoken horror of the officio. For these children, the mark upon the skull was more than branding. It was declaration. They were blanks, soulless beings whose very presence suffocated psychers, whose existence gnawed at the immaterial fabric of reality. They did not need to be taught silence, for silence followed them, an aura of emptiness that chilled even their instructors. They were despised by their peers, feared by all, and yet most valuable of all. For the Imperium has many weapons, but few that can unmake a sorcerer with a glance. The Culexus were taught to embrace their void, to wear it as armor, to let the absence within them become a weapon sharper than any blade. Each temple's training was a death of a different kind. By the time months had passed, no one could mistake the initiates for children. Their bodies were carved with muscle or twisted with alchemy, their minds hollowed of innocence and filled with nothing but purpose. The process was not complete, but the shaping was nearly done. They had been broken, and in that breaking, remade. In the deepest hours of night, if night could be measured in such places, some initiates wept silently, though their tears burned with chemicals, and their cries never reached another soul. Others whispered fragments of prayers they had once known, not daring to speak the Emperor's name aloud, but shaping syllables in the darkness as though their lips could call back forgotten warmth. But there was no comfort, no salvation, for each child knew, in the hollow core of their being, that they were not training to live, they were training to die, and to die in a way that left no trace. When the time came, they would not be remembered, they would not be honored, they would not even be mourned. Their fate was to vanish into shadows so deep that even history could not follow, and still they endured. For what else was left to them? The final stage of shaping came without warning. As all things in the officio do, one day the initiates awoke in their stone cells, their marks still raw upon their skin, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. The next, they were seized by servitors and dragged into chambers that smelled of blood and oil. The walls here were black iron, riveted together with bolts the size of fists, their surfaces etched with wards in high Gothic and symbols older still. It was said among the instructors that this was the place where the soul was cut free from flesh and then chained back in place. Each child was strapped to a frame of steel, limbs locked in place, heads forced forward by clamps that cut into the scalp. No explanations were given. Instead, the air filled with the sound of machinery, the hiss of steam, the sharp tang of ozone. Devices descended, needles the length of fingers, blades finer than hairs, augmetic talons that whirred with surgical intent. Their bodies were invaded, probed, sliced, injected. Some procedures burned like molten metal, others froze veins solid as ice. Bones were broken and reset at crueler angles. Nerves were tested until the body convulsed in seizure, then soothed with injections that left the mind floating in dream-like haze. The purpose was simple: to prove the flesh could endure what the mind could not. Those who failed were taken away in silence, their bodies removed before the others awoke. Those who survived bore scars not just of skin but of identity. They no longer doubted that they were less than human. They were weapons in the making, and weapons do not ask why they are forged. After the frames came the tests of silence. The initiates were forced into corridors filled with traps, blades that swung from walls, floors that dropped away into darkness, torrents of flame that roared without warning. They were made to walk these corridors barefoot, their wounds still raw, their stomachs empty. Any sound meant failure, and failure meant death. Some faltered when fire kissed their flesh, Some screamed when iron pierced their limbs. Those who lived learned that silence was more than obedience. It was survival itself. The corridors became a prayer, each step a vow to never again allow the voice to betray the body. And so the days bled into nights without measure. Slowly, the initiates ceased to think of themselves as victims. The horror dulled into routine, the routine into existence, the existence into acceptance. They had been taken as children. They had been beaten into shadows. And now they were becoming something else entirely. Things that would one day walk among the stars unseen, feared not for who they were, but for what they represented, the Emperor's will given form in the shape of silence. When at last the shaping was declared complete, there was no ceremony of triumph, no hymns were sung, no laurels laid upon their brows. Instead, they were led one by one into the sanctums of their chosen temples, swallowed forever into labyrinths from which there was no return. They walked forward without hesitation, for hesitation had long ago been beaten from them. Behind them the doors sealed, the clang of iron echoing like the toll of a funeral bell. In truth, it was a funeral. The children had been buried long ago, their names erased, their memories silenced, their humanity interred in the shadowed vaults of the Officio Assassinorum. What stepped through those doors were not children at all, but beginnings of weapons that would never be acknowledged, never be remembered, never be mourned. And thus the shaping of shadows ended, not with a scream, not with a prayer, but with silence so deep it swallowed the very notion of self. The body is supposed to be a sanctuary, the one thing no authority can strip away entirely, but in the temples of the Officio Assassinorum, even that last refuge is taken. Once the mind has been hollowed of innocence and the spirit broken of attachment, the body becomes nothing more than raw material, a shell to be carved, reshaped, poisoned, and reforged until it is a weapon that no longer remembers what it once was. To live as an initiate of the temples is to surrender flesh to fire, to knife, to chemical torment, until one no longer owns even the shape of their own skin. The transformation begins with starvation and excess, the body forced to swing violently between extremes. Weeks of near famine leave muscles shriveled, veins protruding against parchment-thin flesh. Then comes sudden abundance, force-feeding initiates until they retch and choke, their bellies distended and their organs straining. The process is repeated over and over, not to nourish, but to destroy balance, to make the body pliable as clay. Instructors whisper through vox grills that strength lies not in natural endurance, but in obedience to the temple's design. The body learns to accept whatever it is given, no matter how unnatural. After starvation comes incision. Flesh is opened without anesthetic, muscles peeled apart, bones drilled into and fitted with augmetics. Some are subtle, almost invisible, implants that sharpen reflexes, glands that filter toxins, lenses that grant new sight. Others are grotesque, deforming the body into something barely human. A Kalidas initiate may be injected with polymorphine, their cells unraveling and reforming like molten wax, until even their own reflection betrays them. A Vindicare may have ocular implants wired into their skull, vision extended into ranges no human eye was meant to bear. An Everser's veins may be turned into rivers of chemical fire, each heartbeat a detonation of fury barely contained. The body screams against it, but the Officio does not ask the body's permission, it only commands. Pain becomes constant. Joints ache where steel has replaced cartilage. Teeth crack under the pressure of hidden mechanisms. Eyes burn as fluids are replaced with chemical solutions. But the greatest torment lies not in the wounds themselves, but in the absence of relief, for no healing is offered, no balm, no reprieve. The initiates are expected to rise from the slab and train as though nothing has changed. their wounds splitting open with each motion, their flesh searing against iron until scar upon scar maps the landscape of their bodies. Pain ceases to be a warning. It becomes the language of the temple, spoken in every heartbeat. And yet, for all the cruelty, there is a purpose. The temples do not fashion monsters for the sake of monstrosity. Each clade has its own doctrine, its own vision of perfection, and the flesh is bent to that vision as a sculptor bends clay beneath his hands. The Vindicare are sculpted into statues of stillness, their flesh thinned of all excess, their nerves trained to obey with absolute precision. Their very metabolism is altered, slowed until they can endure starvation for weeks, waiting motionless for the single instant of the perfect shot. The Kalidas are not sculpted but liquefied. Their bodies are rendered unstable, cells bending to the alchemical will of polymorphine. They become shifting creatures, their features never fixed, their very skin no longer belonging to them. To eat, to sleep, to breathe, all become acts of uncertainty, for at any moment, their flesh may shift into something new. Instructors remind them that identity is weakness, and weakness is death. To survive, they must learn to embrace instability, to become nothing so that they may become anyone. The Everser's shaping is a torment beyond comprehension. To survive it is to exist in a body that is constantly at war with itself. Muscles are swollen to tearing point, tendons reinforced with chemical filaments, blood replaced by a boiling cocktail of stimulants. Their hearts beat too fast, their eyes twitch with madness, their very breath is a weapon of violence. They are not meant to live long, they are meant to be unleashed, burning brighter and shorter than any other assassin, their very bodies designed to explode with fury at the Emperor's command. And then the Culexis, the most feared and reviled. Their flesh is not reshaped so much as hidden, wrapped in arcane devices that amplify the void they carry within. Their bodies become hosts for alien technology, psi absorbers grafted into their skulls, spirit-draining helms clamped onto their faces. Where others are sculpted into weapons of precision or rage, the Culexis are left as hollows, their flesh nothing more than a vessel for the emptiness that gnaws at the warp itself. They are not remade to look stronger or faster, but to become living abysses, walking nulls whose very presence is torment. All of this is endured without explanation, without promise of relief, without even the faint comfort of glory. For the assassin's path does not end in medals or statues but in silence. The initiates know this. They understand it, and still they submit, because submission is all that remains. The human body is not designed for such violations, and many do not survive the reshaping. Initiates collapse in their training halls, blood weeping from eyes and ears, organs failing under the burden of chemical intrusion. When they fall, no mercy is granted. Their bodies are not mourned, not buried, not even named. They are dragged away by servitors, reduced to waste, their remains disposed of, as though they were failed tools rather than once living beings. The survivors are forced to watch, to train amid the stains of those who could not endure, to understand that survival itself is not a victory, but merely a delay of inevitable erasure. For the Vindicare, the transformation narrows toward precision. Their every nerve is tested until they can fire a weapon between heartbeats, until their breath itself becomes a metronome of lethality. They are denied companionship, speech, even casual movement. Hours are spent lying motionless in freezing cells, rifles pressed to their shoulders, eyes staring unblinking through scopes at a single target. The moment they twitch, they are struck. The moment they blink, alarms blare. They are molded into statues that breathe, waiting endlessly for the one instant when the trigger must fall. In time, their bodies begin to mirror their discipline, heartbeats slowing, limbs wasting, skin clinging tight to bone. They do not look alive, yet they endure. The Kalitas suffer transformations more intimate, more invasive. Polymorphine is not merely a drug, but a curse. It is fed into their veins, in endless cycles, reshaping them until their flesh grows untrustworthy. One day they awaken with faces that are not their own, voices that echo with unfamiliar tones, hands that tremble with alien gestures. Mirrors are forbidden, yet reflections appear unbidden in pools of water or polished steel, revealing strangers where once a child had stood. The horror is constant, to not know what one will look like at the next breath, to not be certain that one's body is even one's own. And yet this instability is worshipped. Their instructors praise them only when they shed identity completely, when they wear another's form so perfectly that even their peers recoil. The Eversor endure agony that borders on madness. Their blood is not their own, replaced by a slurry of combat stims, neurotoxins, and liquefied fire that surges through their veins with each shuddering pulse of the heart. Sleep becomes impossible, hunger gnaws without end, and every sensation is magnified into torment. Rage builds within them like a storm locked in a cage, ready to shatter flesh and bone at the slightest provocation. They are restrained more often than not, strapped to steel frames and wrapped in chains, while instructors whisper commands into their ears. The Eversor are not trained to endure, they are trained to break again and again, until breaking becomes their nature. And then there are the Culexus, who suffer not through flesh, but through absence. Their bodies are unchanged compared to the grotesque alterations of other temples, but the weight of their existence crushes them all the same. For they are blanks, soulless beings that even the Imperium's servants recoil from. They are not cut apart by scalpels but by isolation. Instructors keep their distance, peers refuse to meet their eyes, and even the air grows colder around them. When psychers are brought into their presence, the results are immediate: screams, convulsions, bleeding eyes. To the Culexus initiate, there is no companionship, no solace, no identity, but the hollow they embody. They are told they are weapons, but what they feel is curse. Their flesh is not clay but a prison for the void. As the years of torment accumulate, the initiates cease to distinguish between pain and existence. Their bodies no longer feel like their own, and so they begin to treat them as tools, extensions of command, rather than vessels of self. To lift a blade is not to act, but simply to function. To breathe is not life, but a rhythm drilled into the chest. Even the beating of the heart is no longer natural, altered by implants or stimulants, regulated by devices humming beneath the skin. What remains is a husk shaped by the will of others, a sculpture carved from blood and agony. Yet, in rare moments, fragments of humanity still flicker. An initiate might dream of a mother's voice, though they cannot recall the words. Another might glimpse a child's reflection in water, though they no longer know if it is theirs. These moments are brief, quickly drowned in punishment, but they reveal a terrible truth. No matter how deeply the officio reshapes flesh, traces of the human spirit remain, clinging stubbornly to what once was. And it is that spirit, fragile though it is, that makes the final transformations all the more cruel. For the officio does not stop at altering flesh, it demands the annihilation of even those final whispers of self. There is no end to the refinement, for the officio views perfection not as an achievement, but as an eternal demand. The initiates are thrust again and again into the chambers of pain, each return marked by new incisions, new grafts, new fluids coursing through their veins. Instructors whisper through their vox grills that the body is weak, that flesh is betrayal, that only by submission to alteration can the assassin ever transcend humanity. It is not enough to obey. One must allow oneself to be unmade, again and again, until the line between endurance and death blurs beyond recognition. For the Vindicare, the final refinements come in the form of obsession. They are placed in isolation towers, each alone with a single rifle and a single target, set hundreds of meters away. Days pass without food or water, the only relief a trickle of nutrient fluid delivered by tubes. The expectation is simple: one perfect shot. If they fail, the punishment is swift and terminal. If they succeed, they remain in their tower, commanded to repeat the act endlessly until perfection ceases to be effort and becomes instinct. Their bodies wither, but their hands grow steady. Their minds collapse into singularity, where every breath is measured, every heartbeat anticipated, every trigger pull an act of worship. The Kalidas endure the opposite: constant change, constant transformation. Polymorphine courses through them until their very cells revolt, reshaping features, swelling muscles, thinning limbs, shifting skin like wax beneath a flame. Their instructors command them to assume the likeness of peers, then strangers, then enemies long since dead. They must move like them, speak like them, even bleed as they would bleed. Failure means death, but success carries its own price: the loss of certainty. To awaken each day with a new face is to forget what one once was. Eventually the Kalidas cease to wonder, for memory itself becomes untrustworthy. They exist not as individuals, but as masks waiting to be worn. The Eversor are the most brutalized. Their bodies are chained to stasis coffins, their minds barely tethered to sanity. When released, they are driven into arenas filled with targets, sometimes machines, sometimes beasts, sometimes other initiates. The chemicals roaring through their blood reduce them to frenzied storms of violence, tearing flesh with teeth and nails when weapons fail. The slaughter ends only when every target is reduced to ruin, and even then the Eversor continues to rage until restrained by force. Afterwards, they are injected with counteragents, their minds dragged back from the brink of oblivion. But each time they return, they are less themselves and more the storm. Their flesh is no longer theirs. It is a battlefield, a cage of constant war between control and madness. And the Culexus, theirs is a fate of solitude. They are not injected, not transformed with alchemy or steel, for their nature is already the most unnatural of all. Instead, their bodies are shackled with psychic null gear, their skulls encased in helms that amplify the void within them. These devices weigh more than iron, pressing down on their spines until every movement aches. They live under the knowledge that their very presence is abhorrence. Other initiates shrink from them. Instructors speak only in curt commands. Even the stone walls seem colder where they walk. When psychers are brought into their chambers, the horror is immediate: wails of despair, blood seeping from eyes, death by sheer proximity. The Culexus are taught to embrace this, to wield their emptiness as a weapon. Yet, in the stillness of night, they are left with only one thought: that they are nothing, less than nothing, a hollow given flesh. As the years pass, the initiates lose all memory of natural sensation. Taste fades beneath chemical diets. Touch is numbed by scar tissue and augmetic plates. Sight is filtered through implants. Sound distorted by vox helms and auditory grafts. The body is no longer an experience, but an instrument, an object to be tuned, tightened, and sacrificed. When an initiate looks at their hand, they do not see flesh. They see a tool, a blade waiting to be wielded. And so the flesh, once belonging to the child, becomes the clay of the Emperor's hidden sculptors. Every alteration, every scar, every chemical agony is a chisel strike upon the human form. What emerges is not human, nor even monstrous, but something in between: a shadow sculpted into substance, a body stripped of ownership, a vessel for silence and death. When the reshaping nears completion, there is no ceremony, no declaration that the process is over. The initiates simply realize one day that there is nothing left to take. The body has been burned, remade, broken and rebuilt so many times that it ceases to resist. Flesh accepts the burden of poison as though it were blood. Bones accept augmetics as though they had always been metal. Minds accept command as though it were thought. What remains is not transformation, but the absence of change, for the clay has hardened into its final form. In these final stages, the officio tests the assassins, not with trials of endurance, but with demonstrations of silence. A vindicare may be placed on a rooftop for weeks, given one target in a city that never sleeps, no guidance, no time limit, only the command that the shot must come when it matters most. The Kalidas may be thrown into a noble household, their identity erased, commanded to live an entire life under false guise until the order to strike is whispered. The Eversur may be unleashed upon a hive's underlevels, their slaughter permitted until exhaustion proves whether their stimulants can sustain them. The Calexis may be led into a chamber filled with psychers and told only to walk among them, to bear their screams until silence falls. These are not tests in the sense of lessons but crucibles, final proofs that the flesh is no longer their own. It is said that some initiates, when pressed to the edge of endurance, glimpse fragments of their old selves. A vindicare's finger trembles for just an instant, as though remembering the warmth of holding another's hand. A Kalidas pauses when they see a reflection that stirs some long-buried memory of their true face. An Eversur, even in madness, whispers a name before the frenzy consumes them. A Calexis wonders what it would be to be loved, even as psychers die screaming in their presence. These moments do not last, but they mark the tragedy that lingers beneath the surface, that no matter how thoroughly the flesh is broken, traces of the human spirit remain trapped inside. The instructors do not acknowledge this. They offer no comfort, no recognition. To them, these whispers of humanity are imperfections to be buried, flaws to be silenced beneath further conditioning. Yet perhaps it is these remnants, fragile and fleeting, that give the assassins their final shape. For a weapon with no ghost of humanity is predictable, but a weapon haunted by memory strikes with something deeper, something crueler. When the flesh is fully sculpted, the initiates are no longer children, no longer themselves, and no longer even the property of their own survival. They are vessels, and the officio fills them with purpose. They walk differently, they breathe differently, they dream differently, if they dream at all. The clay has hardened into statues of silence, their forms etched by suffering into something beyond recognition. And as they stand, ready for the next phase, there is no applause, no celebration, only the knowledge that they have been unmade, and in that unmaking, reborn as instruments whose lives will never again be their own. The flesh has been claimed, the clay has hardened. What remains is not life, but function. There comes a moment when the endless reshaping ceases, when the officio no longer seeks to break the body, but instead demands its service. The assassins who have survived thus far, those rare fragments of humanity that endured fire, toxin, and isolation, are given not release, but silence. Their bodies are no longer in flux, their veins no longer awash with new poisons. Instead, they are cast into the stillness of waiting, and it is there that the true transformation begins. For silence is not absence, it is wait. In silence, the assassin hears the pulse of their own blood, the scrape of their breath across the throat, the dull thunder of the heart, and silence teaches them that each sound is weakness. The vindicare learns to slow the rhythm of the body until heartbeat itself becomes optional, until life narrows into an existence of precision where even the breath must serve the rifle. The Kalidas learns that silence must not merely be endured, but concealed, that their very presence must vanish as completely as their voice. The Eversur learns a silence so violent it terrifies those who witness it, a silence born of chains rattling just before frenzy erupts. And the Culexus, their silence is absolute, a void that does not wait or breathe or relent, a silence that swallows even thought in those around them. It is in this chapter of their lives that the officio teaches patience, and patience is cruelty. An assassin may spend weeks lying prone in shadows, a rifle balanced upon a crumbling ledge, eyes never leaving a single window where a target may appear. Hunger gnaws, thirst scorches, the spine screams in pain, but the command is clear: move, and you fail; breathe too loudly, and you fail; fire too soon, or too late, and you fail. Those who fail do not train again. They are disposed of, erased, their names never spoken. Perfection is demanded, not once, but always. The Kalidas, meanwhile, are forced into silence of the soul. They live under false skins, walking among the unknowing, pretending to be servants, siblings, lovers, confidants. They may live entire years in such guises, never permitted to break character, never permitted to betray the mask. The silence they endure is not stillness of sound, but stillness of self, the smothering of identity, until nothing remains beneath the lies. They are tested not only on their ability to deceive others, but on their ability to deceive themselves. And when, at last, their strike comes, poison in a chalice, a dagger beneath the ribs, it is not triumph, but a whisper, an inevitability released into the world without sound. The Eversur knows no such restraint. Their silence is merely the pause before eruption, the sharp inhale before the storm. They are bound within their stasis coffins, sealed away in eternal darkness where even thought feels trapped. Days, weeks, years may pass in that prison of stillness, until the moment the coffin is opened and stimulants surge. Then silence shatters into screams and slaughter, every heartbeat becoming a drumbeat of murder. For the Eversur, the silence between missions is not peace, it is suffocation, a void that only violence can break. And then there are the Culexus. Theirs is a silence beyond comprehension, a silence that bleeds into others and drives them to madness. They walk among psychers who collapse in terror at their presence, who claw at their own faces, as though to rid themselves of the void pressing in around them. Even other assassins keep their distance, unwilling to dwell too long in the aura of nothingness that clings to a Culexus. Their silence is isolation perfected. In it they are weapons already drawn, the very absence of being honed into a blade sharper than steel. Yet in all of this, silence is not reward but burden. The assassins are taught to accept that their lives will always be lived in shadows, in pauses, in the breath before the storm. They will never march in parades, never stand in halls of triumph, never even hear their names spoken with pride. They are trained to understand that their victories will be unseen, their sacrifices unknown, their deaths unmarked. For theirs is not glory, but the silence between heartbeats, the instant that decides the fate of worlds, yet passes without sound. The Vindicare lives this silence most acutely, for their entire existence narrows to the distance between target and rifle. They are stationed upon rooftops where the wind howls, in crumbling towers where stone shifts beneath their weight, in wastelands where the air is poison and time itself feels suspended. Their bodies grow rigid, their eyes unblinking behind scope lenses that magnify the smallest quiver of movement. They wait, sometimes for days, sometimes for months, until the precise moment when a single breath aligns with a single heartbeat, and the trigger is drawn. The silence does not break with the gunshot, for the Vindicare does not hear it as sound. To them, the report is already past, the mission already complete, the world already altered. The silence is eternal, and the shot is only its punctuation. The Kalidas becomes silence incarnate in another way. Their mastery is not of distance, but of presence. They are taught to be shadows in plain sight, to speak words that are not their own, to laugh at jests they do not understand, to weep at losses they do not feel. For years they may live within another life, and yet not once betray the tremor of falsity. The silence of a Kalidas is not absence of sound, but absence of self. They wear their borrowed identities like veils, and when at last they strike, it is not with rage or triumph, but with inevitability. A goblet tipped, a whisper in the ear, a sudden thrust of a blade. It is all the same. The silence does not end at the moment of death. It deepens, for the Kalidas cannot celebrate. They must only vanish, leaving no proof they were ever there at all. For the Eversor, silence is torment. Their entire being rebels against stillness. Their veins demand motion. Their hearts thunder as though they would burst. Their minds burn with chemical frenzy. To keep them locked within their stasis coffins is both necessity and cruelty. They scream, though no sound escapes. They rage, though chains hold them immobile. When the coffins are opened, they explode into violence so absolute that silence itself becomes unrecognizable, drowned beneath the roar of slaughter. Yet even in their rampage, silence lingers. It is in the aftermath, when the Eversor stands surrounded by ruin, breathing chemicals that sear the lungs, that the silence returns, not as peace, but as emptiness. For there is nothing left when all is slain, and the silence of the Eversor is the silence of a graveyard. The Culexus does not know silence as torment. For them, silence is identity. They are voids, nulls, blanks. Their silence is not the absence of noise, but the absence of being itself. To walk into a chamber filled with psychers is to unleash a silence that deafens the soul, an absence so complete that it unravels minds. Screams echo not because the Culexus breaks silence, but because they enforce it, an eternal, suffocating stillness that no psyche can withstand. And yet for the Culexus, this silence is all they have. They cannot shed it, cannot escape it. It clings to them as a second skin, isolating them even from their kin among the officio. They are the embodiment of silence, and in that embodiment lies their curse, to forever walk alone. And through each of these forms, the lesson is the same. Silence is not peace. Silence is not rest. Silence is the burden of the assassin, the heartbeat stretched into eternity, the breath held without end. It is the space where the Emperor's will is enacted without fanfare, without witness, without recognition. It is the silence between heartbeats, where worlds are changed and no one knows why. There are whispers among the instructors that the silence is the true killer, not the blade nor the rifle. Weapons are mere extensions, disposable and interchangeable, but silence that is eternal. A Vindicare may be armed with the most sacred Exodus rifle, a Kalidas may wield the polymorphine that unravels flesh, an Eversor may surge with stimulants that turn their body into a weapon, a Culexus may wear the helm that magnifies their void, but without silence, these tools are meaningless. The assassin is silence made manifest. They are the space between one sound and the next, the breath no one notices until it is gone. For the Vindicare, silence becomes prayer. Each shot is preceded by hours of stillness, the assassin's mind narrowing until there is nothing but the target. They listen to the world breathe, hear the flutter of banners, the murmur of servants, the faint scrape of armor plates shifting. They catalog every detail, waiting for the single instant when all variables converge, and when the rifle speaks, it does so in silence, for the Vindicare has already departed, leaving only death in their wake. The Kalidas carries silence differently. They wear it beneath their skins, bury it in the cadences of voices not their own. They may sit at a feast, drink wine with nobles, whisper secrets into the ears of lovers, and all the while carry silence like a dagger hidden in the heart. Their victims never suspect. Even in their final moment, when the poison burns or the blade enters, silence prevails. The Kalidas does not gloat, does not reveal, does not confess. They vanish into the void of anonymity, leaving behind no story, no closure, no truth. The silence swallows all. The Eversor cannot carry silence. They can only be caged within it. Every moment they spend in their stasis coffin is agony, every second a torment of stillness their body cannot endure. When at last they are released, the silence shatters like glass, and the world pays the price. They scream without words, their silence turned to frenzy, their stillness converted into unrestrained slaughter. And yet, when the mission ends and they are dragged back into containment, silence returns with a cruelty that eclipses even their blood rage. It is not peace that greets them, but the suffocating stillness of confinement. For the Eversor, silence is both prison and punishment, an eternity they can never escape. The Culexus embodies silence so completely that it is difficult for others to comprehend. They do not carry it, do not endure it, do not resist it. They are silence. Wherever they walk, psychers tremble, voices falter, thoughts die stillborn. Their silence is not absence but anti-presence, an annihilation of being that gnaws at the very fabric of existence. Even their allies cannot look upon them without unease, for to stand near a Culexus is to feel one's own soul recede. For them, silence is not a burden, it is their essence. Yet that essence ensures that they will never know companionship, never know warmth, never know the touch of another untainted by dread. The silence of the assassin is not only a weapon, but also their fate. They will never be sung of in ballads, never see their deeds inscribed upon monuments. They are not remembered. Their victories are whispered only in secret archives, their names reduced to numbers, their sacrifices erased. Even their deaths will be silent, coffins lowered without ceremony, files sealed, missions erased from record. They are shadows within shadows, known only by the silence they leave behind. And perhaps that is why silence breaks so many of them, not in body, not in flesh, but in spirit. To live without witness, without memory, without acknowledgement, is to erode one's own sense of existence. The officio relies on this erosion. It is part of the design, part of the forging, for in the end the assassin must accept that silence is not what they endure, but what they are. If the flesh was clay, then silence is the kiln. It hardens what was sculpted, seals what was broken, preserves the assassin not as a living being, but as a vessel of inevitability. The initiates who have survived thus far come to understand that their lives will never be measured in years, but in moments, moments that unfold within the silence between heartbeats. One instant of perfect patience, one breath held without falter, one step unseen by all but the Emperor's unseen hand. That is the span of their existence. The Vindicare knows this most intimately. They may lie in place for weeks, the world shifting around them, wars beginning and ending, seasons changing, until the one instant arrives. In that instant, silence is everything, and when the shot is fired, history pivots upon it, though none will ever know whose hand held the rifle. The Kalidas breathes silence in crowds, embodying lies so complete that even they forget the truth. Their entire existence is a masquerade, and silence is the mask they wear. When their strike comes, it is never announced, never celebrated. It simply happens, like the drawing of a curtain, and the world moves on unaware. The Eversor exists as a silence shattered, the pause before a storm that annihilates all it touches. For them, the silence is torment, and yet it is also the proof of their purpose. They are unleashed, because the stillness before their frenzy is unbearable, and only blood can release them from it. The Culexus never leave silence. They do not wait for it, nor break it, nor endure it. They are its embodiment. Their silence is not the breath before the shot. not the stillness before the strike. It is the void into which all sound, all thought, all spirit collapses. Their silence is eternal, and it is terrifying. When the instructors finally dismiss their assassins into the wider Imperium, it is not with triumph or ceremony. There are no banners, no commendations, no parting words. The assassins simply vanish into silence, carried upon ships that leave no record, guided toward worlds that will never know them. Their training is complete, not when their bodies are strong, nor when their minds are sharp, but when they have embraced silence so utterly that they no longer question it. They are no longer men, no longer women, no longer children stolen from their lives. They are silence given flesh, death given patience, inevitability given form. And in that silence, the galaxy trembles, though it does not know why. No assassin truly serves themselves. Every lesson, every scar, every silence endured is not for their own sake, but for a will far beyond their comprehension. They are not agents of their own desires, nor even of their own masters within the officio. They are instruments of the Emperor, blades unsheathed only when the Imperium itself hangs by a thread. To speak of them as individuals is to misunderstand their very essence, for they are shadows, and a shadow has no identity beyond the light that casts it. Within the cloisters of Terra there are vaults sealed to all but the highest lords, where data slates bear records of wars averted, uprisings ended, heresies strangled before they could find voice. In each of these the mark of the Officio Assassinorum is present, though never acknowledged. Assassins are the scalpel where the Astra Militarum is the hammer, the whisper where the Adeptus Astartes are the thunder. Their role is not to inspire, but to erase, to make certain that what must be ended is ended without witness, and that what must never be spoken of is consigned to silence. Among the temples, this service manifests in forms as varied as their doctrines. The Vindicare serve as the Emperor's unseen judgment, their rifles casting down warlords, prophets, and traitors whose voices might otherwise ignite entire sectors. The Calitus serve as his deception, infiltrating the innermost circles of power to unravel schemes from within, their faces borrowed, their voices stolen. The Eversur are his rage, unleashed only when terror must outpace reason, when the slaughter of one becomes the salvation of millions. And the Colexis, they are his void, the ultimate sanction, sent only against those whose corruption bleeds into the warp, whose heresy infects the very soul of mankind. The galaxy never sees these deeds. A planetary governor falls dead upon his throne, and the court whispers of poison, never of a Calitus standing among them. A warlord's head bursts in the midst of his rally, and the crowd flees in panic, never knowing a Vindicare was watching from miles away. A hive collapses into panic as a tide of bodies is ripped apart by a single berserker, and survivors speak of daemons, never of the Eversur who was there. A coven of sorcerers lies lifeless in a circle of silence, their eyes hollow, their minds shriveled, and priests proclaim it the Emperor's wrath, never the tread of a Colexis. To serve as one of these shadows is to know that your life will never be seen, never be praised, never even be believed. You are a rumor, a nightmare, a shape glimpsed only at the edge of vision. You are a tool that must never be acknowledged, for acknowledgement would betray the truth that even the Imperium's vast armies and holy orders are not enough, that the Emperor himself requires shadows to keep his realm intact. And so the assassins accept their fate. They live without recognition, without reward, without legacy. Their service is not recorded in banners or statues, but in the absence of disaster, the silence of threats that never reached fruition. They are not remembered, because they must not be remembered. They are not honored, because honor would unmake the silence they embody. They are the Emperor's shadows, and a shadow leaves no trace. The Vindicare knows this most deeply, for their service is the most invisible of all. They are dispatched across light years with a single name, a single face, a single command. They may spend years upon a world, never once breaking cover, waiting for the moment when one shot will alter the fate of billions. No medal greets them when their mission is complete. No record preserves their aim. The planet below believes that fate itself struck down its leader, never suspecting the eye that watched from a mile away, never suspecting the assassin who already vanished into the void. The Vindicare is the purest distillation of the Shadow's art, the absence of recognition made flesh. The Kalitas lives their life in masks so layered that even they lose track of which faces they have worn. They dine in palaces, sleep in the beds of kings, kneel in shrines beside zealots whose faith they do not share. They whisper into ears, guide hands to sign decrees, nudge destinies one fraction at a time until empires collapse from within. Yet when they strike, when the final dagger is drawn or the last sip of poison is swallowed, they vanish without name, without trace. The courtiers will blame intrigue, the priests will see divine retribution, the people will believe it was all inevitable. The Kalitas leaves no memory. Their life is an echo within the lives of others, erased the moment it is heard. The Eversor, by contrast, is impossible to ignore in the moment of his release. Cities burn, screams echo, walls run slick with blood. To the survivor, the Eversor is a daemon, a nightmare of steel and frenzy that no man can stand against. But when the frenzy ends and the stasis coffin reclaims its prisoner, even this terror is erased. Official records describe uprisings crushed by local militias, rebellions turned by sudden and inexplicable fear, cults destroyed by their own madness. No one dares admit that what swept through the hive was no mortal force, but an assassin whose silence preceded and followed slaughter. The Eversor's shadow is broad and violent, but even it is folded into silence once the coffin closes. The Culexus moves in even darker obscurity. Their missions are always spoken of afterward as miracles or curses. Where they walk, psychers perish, daemons flicker and fail, warp rifts collapse into nothing. Priests call it the Emperor's direct intervention. Acolytes write hymns to his unseen hand, yet the truth is colder. It is a blank-faced assassin whose very existence is abhorrent, walking in silence where no other could tread. They never speak, never explain, never linger. And when their work is done, they vanish, leaving only faith to fill the void of understanding. For what soul could accept the truth that the Emperor's will is carried out not only by saints and warriors, but by creatures so empty they unmake existence itself? Each temple serves differently, but their unifying essence remains. They are the shadows in which the Imperium survives, and though their hands shape history, they are never written into it. They are not heroes, not martyrs, not even villains. They are silence, and silence cannot be remembered. On Terra itself, where the scent of incense clings eternally to the stone of the Sanctum Imperialis, and the endless drone of prayer is never silenced, the Officio Assassinorum maintains its most hidden sanctuaries. Few outside the High Lords ever glimpse them. Those who do speak only in guarded fragments, as if the memory itself could draw reprisal. It is said that beneath the surface of the throne world, deep below the spires and manufactoria, there are chambers where light does not reach and silence itself feels sculpted into the walls. Within these vaults lie shrines to the Emperor, not as a radiant god, but as a distant judge whose shadow demands obedience. Here, assassins kneel before effigies wrought in steel and obsidian, and pledge to kill, not for their own creed, but for the Emperor's will alone. The rituals are sparse, stripped of ornamentation. Unlike the Baroque grandeur of the ecclesiarchy, the assassin's liturgy is direct, almost clinical. They do not pray for glory or victory. They pray for accuracy, for patience, for silence. They pray for the strength to exist without recognition, to strike without hesitation, to die without remembrance. The priests who guide them, if such men can be called priests, speak in cold truths rather than fire. The emperor does not need martyrs, they say, only tools sharp enough to cut and silent enough to vanish. Each assassin leaves the shrine not uplifted, but emptied, stripped of doubt and of self. It is a faith not in salvation, but in obedience. Rumors persist that even within these hidden sanctuaries, fragments of the emperor's power can be felt. Some claim the shadows move unnaturally, that the air grows heavier, that the silence itself presses down as if the master of mankind is listening. To the faithful, this is proof that the assassins serve as his chosen hands, the unseen extensions of his will. To the more cynical, it is simply the conditioning of minds broken and reforged to see him in every absence. Yet none deny that those who walk from these chambers emerge changed, their gaze sharper, their presence diminished, as if they carry within them a void only death can fill. From such sanctuaries, the Emperor's shadows disperse into the galaxy. They travel alone, without fanfare, without escort, borne across the void on ships that carry no heraldry and file no charts. The assassins move like whispers through the Imperium's veins, unknown even to the billions they pass among. They will step onto a hive world and vanish into the press of bodies, or arrive upon a shrine world, cloaked as a pilgrim, or pass through a frontier outpost with a falsified writ. No eyes notice them, no records retain them. They arrive unseen, and they leave unseen, and in between they unmake whatever life was deemed too dangerous to be allowed. Everywhere they walk, history shifts, yet history will never name them. The galaxy never pauses to ask how many threats have been ended before they began. For every war fought by the Astra Militarum, for every crusade carried by the Adeptus Astartes, there are countless other conflicts extinguished in silence. A cult leader slain before his sermons gathered strength, a rogue commander silenced before his rebellion could march, a heretic dismantled before his devices reached fruition. The Imperium is built upon victories seen and unseen, yet it is the unseen ones that matter most, for without them, the tides of corruption and ambition would drown humanity before its armies could even lift a blade. And yet, to live this life is to embrace erasure. An assassin will never be celebrated as a custodian might, nor sung of as a space marine hero. Their names are deleted the moment they are chosen, their faces erased, their families struck from record. They walk a path where memory itself betrays their purpose. The paradox is cruel. They serve the Emperor more directly than most, yet their devotion demands that even their existence be forgotten. To be known would be to fail. To be remembered would be to undo everything they have preserved. For some, this fate is torment. There are whispered accounts, always fragmented, always disbelieved, of assassins who broke beneath the weight of anonymity, who longed for recognition, even in death. These rare souls are said to vanish into execution chambers, their deaths unmarked even by those who carried them out. Others embrace the silence so deeply that it consumes them, leaving only a shell that obeys without question, an echo of a human being that no longer exists. Such is the spectrum of the Emperor's shadows, either crushed by erasure or fully merged with it. The Imperium itself cannot decide how to speak of them. Some ecclesiarchs dare to call them saints, unseen martyrs whose hands act where angels cannot tread. Others call them abominations too close to daemons for comfort, tolerated only because their utility outweighs their horror. Most mortals, however, never speak of them at all. To even acknowledge the existence of assassins is to risk censure, for the High Lords demand silence on the matter. The shadows must remain shadows, lest the Imperium realize just how fragile its survival truly is. And so their legend persists only as rumor, whispers on frontier worlds of a ghost who kills governors in their sleep, hushed tales on hive streets of a faceless figure walking among the masses, never eating, never speaking, always watching. Fragments of stories exchanged by soldiers who swear that an uprising ended before it began, though no one can say how. These stories weave into the fabric of Imperial myth, blurred between faith and fear. The truth is never told, never written, never proven. That is the assassin's greatest triumph and their greatest curse. For in the end, the Emperor's shadows are not meant to be seen. They are meant to be felt only in absence, in the silence after a scream, in the stillness where rebellion dies, in the void where history itself has been cut away. There are some who claim that when the assassins act, it is not merely the command of the High Lords or the authority of the officio that guides their hand. They whisper that it is the Emperor himself who moves them, his will rippling outward from the golden throne like unseen currents in the void. No scribe would dare inscribe such words officially, for to attribute agency beyond the Astronomicon or the throne's eternal vigil verges upon heresy. Yet, in the dim corners of cloisters and the hushed gatherings of penitents, the rumor lingers that the shadows of the Assassinorum are not chosen by men, but by a God who sees what cannot be seen. Pilgrims speak of it in prayers that never find the sanction of the ecclesiarchy. They murmur of moments when the Emperor's gaze falls upon a heretic lord or a sorcerous tyrant, and an assassin is loosed into the galaxy like an arrow drawn from his hand. To believe such things is dangerous, but the stories persist. How else, they ask, could a single bullet slay a figure whose rise threatened entire sectors? How else could a masked infiltrator topple dynasties woven with centuries of intrigue? To the faithful, these are not the works of mortals but the direct extension of the Emperor's presence, his will made manifest in silence. Others speak differently, more fearful than reverent. They suggest that perhaps the shadows serve not the Emperor but the machinery of Terra, that their hand is not divine but political. To them the assassins are weapons of the High Lords, tools of suppression used to prune rivals and keep the Imperium's vast hierarchy in balance. If true, then every whispered miracle becomes a manipulation, every divine strike a calculated removal. Yet such thoughts must be buried quickly, for to give them voice is to court suspicion, and suspicion is often answered with silence more permanent than death. Between these poles lies uncertainty, and it is this uncertainty that feeds the mythos of the assassins, for in the Imperium, the line between faith and function is always blurred. The Astra Militarum calls its victories miracles even when they are bought in blood and steel. The Adeptus Mechanicus calls its engines divine even when they are constructed in manufactoria by human hands. Why should the Officio Assassinorum be any different? The truth, whatever it may be, dissolves into the same haze of incense and prayer that shrouds all of Terra. Still, there are those who swear they have felt it directly, that in the moment before they pulled the trigger, or drove the blade, or loosed the fury within, they sensed not their own will, nor even their training, but something vast and incomprehensible guiding their hand. They speak of pressure, of silence heavier than air, of a gaze without eyes pressing upon them. They dare not name it, yet the implication is clear. To such assassins, their shadowed lives are not merely service to an institution, but communion with something greater, something eternal. And so the whispers persist, flowing like smoke through the halls of Terra and across the stars. Are the assassins the Emperor's shadows, extensions of his silent will, or are they the tools of men, cloaked in faith to hide political necessity? No record provides an answer, and none ever will. In the Imperium, certainty is a luxury denied to all but the dead. The most devout claim that the Emperor's silence is not absence but intention, that his refusal to speak is itself the language through which he directs his chosen. To them, The assassin is proof. Where saints emerge bathed in visions and miracles, the assassin moves in quiet, without proclamation, without revelation, embodying a faith far colder. They are not touched by radiant light, but by shadow. And in the Imperium, where shadow itself is sanctified if it serves the throne, that is enough. In the catacombs of Terra, certain recluses of the ecclesiarchy have dared to weave liturgies around this idea, though such texts rarely survive the scrutiny of higher authorities. They speak of the emperor as the great architect of silence, and the assassins as his fingers pressing upon the galaxy's throat. Their hymns are never sung aloud, only whispered in tones barely louder than thought, as if to speak them too boldly would draw retribution. Yet even in their secrecy, these devotions reveal the strange reverence bred by absence. The less is known of the assassins, the more holy they become in the minds of those who imagine their deeds. Others recoil from such notions. Among certain scholars of the administratum, a darker suspicion thrives that the assassins are proof not of the emperor's active hand, but of his failing strength. For if the emperor still truly guided humanity, why would such brutal measures be necessary? Why would clandestine murders and monstrous experiments be required to preserve his realm? In this interpretation, the assassinorum is not a holy instrument but a desperate one, wielded by mortals to disguise the cracks in divine authority. This view, of course, is never spoken beyond sealed chambers, for to suggest weakness in the emperor is to invite annihilation. Yet even in denial, the whispers grow, each tale of an inexplicable death, each story of a heretic cut down before his blasphemy could bloom, reinforces the sense that something beyond simple human hands is at work. Faith fills every gap that truth cannot bridge. The emperor, the high lords, the shadows themselves, all become interchangeable in the minds of the faithful. What matters is not the source, but the certainty that the Imperium endures only because threats vanish before they can rise. And in this way the assassin becomes paradox incarnate. They are feared yet revered, denied yet worshipped, unseen yet ever present. They are both proof of divine will and evidence of mortal necessity. They are the living embodiment of the Imperium's greatest truth, that survival matters more than truth, that faith endures where certainty collapses, and that silence speaks louder than revelation. There are archives, long sealed and accessible only to the most elevated among the Inquisition, that hold fragments of records hinting at connections no ordinary servant of the Imperium could comprehend. Some files speak of assassins dispatched before threats were even identified, as if guided by foresight beyond any mortal calculation. Entire uprisings were ended before the first banners were raised, cult leaders slain before their followers even knew to gather, secessionists silenced before treason was spoken aloud. The administratum marks such events as anomalies, yet whispers call them prophecy fulfilled. Did the officio simply anticipate what others did not, or was there truly an unseen hand guiding them to strike before sin could even be born? Among the temples themselves, these questions are never spoken. A vindicator does not ask why the target must die. A Kalidas does not ponder the meaning behind the masks they wear. The Everser's mind is drowned in chemicals that obliterate doubt before it can form, while the Kilexis lives in such estrangement from existence that the question itself has no meaning. For them, obedience is survival, and speculation is corruption. Yet outside their cloisters, in the hushed corners of monasteries and the fevered dreams of pilgrims, the question festers. If the assassins serve the emperor directly, then every strike is holy writ. If they serve only the high lords, then their silence is nothing but the machinery of politics masquerading as faith, which is more terrifying that a god rules through shadows, or that men do. Across the stars, fragments of rumor gather shape. On shrine worlds, pilgrims murmur prayers not to saints, but to the nameless hand that ends heresy before it begins. On frontier colonies, settlers tell their children that ghosts walk among them, unseen protectors who erase evil before it can grow. And in the hidden libraries of forbidden sects, heretics weave darker interpretations, that the assassins are proof not of divine will, but of a god's decline, a realm so fragile it must kill its enemies in silence, lest the illusion of strength be shattered. The truth remains buried, as it always must. The Imperium thrives not on knowledge, but on the absence of it. Where clarity would weaken faith, mystery strengthens it. Where certainty would erode loyalty, silence preserves it. The assassins embody this principle perfectly. They are not meant to be understood, but to be feared, imagined, mythologized. They are whispers of the throne, carrying with them both hope and dread, and leaving behind only the question that no one dares answer aloud. And so the galaxy continues. Balanced on the edge of silence, the assassins walk unseen, and their passing carves paths that no chronicle will ever record. Worlds fall quiet where they have walked, histories shift, and faith adjusts itself around the void they leave behind. To the unknowing masses, their interventions are miracles or curses. To the High Lords, they are necessities, wielded sparingly yet without hesitation. And to the few who serve within the temples, they are nothing but duty, stripped of glory, stripped even of the certainty of why. Perhaps that is the truest reflection of the Imperium itself. A realm built upon sacrifice without reward, upon obedience without comprehension, upon lives spent without remembrance. The assassin is not an aberration, but the purest embodiment of what it means to serve the Emperor, to give all without question, and to vanish as if you had never been. They are what every soldier, every servant, every citizen is asked to be, distilled into a singular and absolute form. They are the end point of faith and fear combined, the whisper that becomes a scream only in the moment of death, then fades once more into silence. What, then, is left of them? Not names, for those are erased. Not faces, for those are forgotten. Not legacies, for those are forbidden. What remains is only the atmosphere they create. The sense that the Emperor's reach extends into every shadow, that no heretic is beyond his grasp, that no secret crime can be hidden. The assassin does not live to be remembered, but to ensure the Imperium's memory itself endures. That is their triumph, that is their doom. And somewhere, upon the throne world, the question lingers unasked. Do these shadows serve merely the decrees of men who sit in gilded chambers, or do they serve the Emperor himself, whose silence may yet conceal intention beyond mortal understanding? None can say. None will ever know. It is in that absence of answer that the assassins find their true power, for as long as the Imperium believes, or fears, that every shadow may hide his hand, no rebellion will ever rise without trembling, no heresy will ever bloom without dread. Thus ends the path of the Imperial assassin, a life erased, a death unwitnessed, a service eternal. They are the unseen guardians of a realm that can never acknowledge them, the whisper of the throne that is both salvation and damnation. Their fate is not to be celebrated, but to vanish, leaving only the silence from which they were born.